It's May 16th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with the latest opinion polls on South Korea's presidential runners. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung is leading his People Power Party rival Kim Suk with 49% support against Kim's 27% in a national barometer survey conducted this week. Lee and Kim continue on their campaign trails in Jeollabuk-do province and the Chungcheong-do province region on Friday, respectively. APEC member states gathered on South Korea's Jeju Island, eyeing trade negotiations with the U.S. They include South Korea, with the country's trade officials set to sit down with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. The highly anticipated trade talks between Russia and Ukraine, originally scheduled for Thursday, may now take place on Friday. U.S. President Donald Trump insists little progress is expected in the discussions unless he meets Russian President Vladimir Putin himself. The Liberal Party's Lee Jae-myung will continue to solidify the party's traditionally firm grip in the Jeollado provinces on Friday. Yesterday in Jeollanam-do province, he vowed balanced regional growth. Our Shin Ha-young has a wrap-up.
After spending the past few days trying to win support in traditionally conservative strongholds, Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung focused on rallying support in his party's stronghold. Lee's campaign on Thursday took him through Jeollanam-do province, including the cities of Gwangyang, Yeosu, Suncheon, and Bokpo. Kicking off his tour of this region, he pointed to the concentration of power in the capital area as the biggest problem South Korea was facing. He emphasized balanced regional development, which is one of his 10 major campaign pledges. In line with this, he highlighted fostering the renewable energy industry as a pledge tailored to the Jeollado provinces, saying the southwest coast holds great potential for renewables.
We don't have a clear plan for renewables yet as we move away from fossil fuels due to global warming. Energy prices are likely to go up, so we need to develop our own resources. That's why I think we should actively grow the renewable energy industry, especially in the southwestern coast and Jeollado provinces.
During his visit to Yeosu, he outlined his energy plan, pledging to turn the Jeollanam-do coast into a global renewable energy hub by building a so-called energy highway. He said the region has plenty of resources but lacks transmission lines, promising to fix the issue and unlock the area's full energy potential.
Why can't we build a country with balanced regional development where companies come for local renewable energy? With Lee Jae-myung's leadership, we can change the nation, just like we saw in Seongnam and Gyeonggi-do, and just like the DP has changed.
Ahead of his rally in the party's stronghold, he visited Hadong, Gyeongsangnam-do province, near the border between Jeollado and Gyeongsang-do provinces. There, he met with young people at Hwage Market to discuss concerns about jobs, housing, and childcare. The choice of location and participants from different regions reflected Lee's intention to promote regional harmony. Lee will continue his campaign on Friday in Jeollabuk-do province, visiting the cities of Iksan and Jeonju. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
And the Conservative Party's Kim Suk kicked off Friday morning by reaching out to commuters again. On Thursday, he spent the day apologizing to the South Korean people for the failed martial law order by former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
Returning to Seoul on Thursday after a 3-day tour of the Southeast, People Power Party presidential candidate Kim Suk kept a low profile, with no major rallies, possibly taking time to regroup at his campaign headquarters. But attention quickly turned to a familiar issue, the legacy of impeached former President Yoon Suk-yeol and his declaration of martial law. Kim, at a press conference, issued a second public apology.
So I sincerely and respectfully apologize to those struggling to make a living outside of the capital region, to many whose lives have become more difficult, to those feeling weighed down or disheartened, and to all affected by the deepening divisions in public opinion.
Kim was also asked about whether Yoon should be expelled from the party. He responded that the decision to leave rests solely with Yoon. That came after newly appointed interim leader Kim Yong-tae said in a morning interview that expulsion could be on the table and that he plans to personally suggest that Yoon step down. Some in the party agree, arguing that distancing from Yoon is critical to winning over undecided voters who are largely critical of the martial law controversy. Meanwhile, the PPP continued its attacks on rival Lee Jae-myung, this time by protesting outside the Supreme Court. The party accuses the Democratic Party of pressuring the judiciary branch after the Supreme Court ruled against Lee in his election violation case and sent it back to a lower court for a guilty verdict. The DP has since moved to summon Chief Justice Choi Lee for a hearing, started pushing for a special probe, and is even reviewing a possible impeachment.
They say democracy is about the rule of law. But have you ever seen anything so absurd? A criminal threatening a judge, summoning a judge for a hearing, launching a special investigation into a judge, or even trying to impeach a judge. Have you ever heard of such madness?
On the policy front, Kim marked Teachers' Day by unveiling his education pledges, including bringing AI into classrooms and restoring teachers' authority, saying excessive student protections have weakened discipline, while also strengthening public education. He also appealed his diplomatic skills as he met interim U.S. Ambassador Joseph Yoon. While the discussion remains private, Kim's chief of staff said they talked candidly about the Korean Peninsula and tariff issues. 김도현, Arirang News.
And Reform Party's Ejun Suk took the time to sit down with students marking Teachers' Day on Thursday. The talks took place over lunch at Seoul National University of Education as he continued his campus cafeteria outreach to college students. Also on the same day, he announced prison reform proposing inmates participate in higher value labor, such as machinery assembly and digital operations, rather than tasks like sewing and cleaning. In response to inquiry about a coalition with the main conservative camp, he condemned those seeking, quote, political engineering. We saw official campaigning for the June 3rd election kickoff this Monday, following a tumultuous weekend, during which a highly anticipated merger fell through. We have our correspondent Oh Seung to fill us in how the race looks in the latest opinion polls. Less than 3 weeks until the election. Good morning, Soo-young.
Hello, Tami.
So, Soo-young, last weekend we finally saw the main conservative ticket finalized, and we now have 3 main leading runners, right?
That's right. So People Power Party candidate Kim Moon-soo, of course, emerged as the leading Conservative candidate, since there was no merger with independent contender former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo for a joint Conservative ticket against the Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung, who has been leading the polls since January. Now, this appears to have somewhat stabilized support for the candidates among the electorate. However, it didn't change the overall landscape of the race. In the latest NBS poll released on Thursday, support for Lee Jae-myung increased to 49%, up 6 percentage points from the previous week, while Kim Moon-soo's decreased by 2 points to 27%, and Ejun Suk's remained the same at 7%. Gallup Korea's poll on Wednesday showed higher support for Lee Jae-myung with 51% support, followed by Kim Moon-soo at 31% and Ejun Suk of the Reform Party at 8%. Now, 57% of respondents said that they wanted a change of government from the right to a left-leaning administration, and that's the highest figure recorded since January, while 32% wanted to retain a Conservative administration. So despite the candidate swap controversy that erupted last week, the public opinion trend hasn't shown much deviation after the final race lineup was confirmed. So that's, in all, quite bad news for the Conservative candidates.
Well, Soo-young, it is clear that the Liberal contender has been far ahead in the polls, but I do have to say we still have 2 weeks, over 2 weeks left until the election, and In politics, anything can happen during that time, right?
That's right, Tammy. In politics, 2 weeks could be 2 years worth of things that happen. And Lee Jae-myung, of course, as you said, has been very much the leading candidate in the polls. But pundits aren't ruling out the possibility of swing voters changing the equation of this three-way race. While Gallup's survey indicates around 8% of voters are undecided or they aren't sure who to back, the MBS poll shows a higher figure at 16%. Now, 17% of those surveyed say that they might change the candidate that they support. The group most open to changing their support were voters in their 20s at 42% and 30s at 30%. Now, this is notably the same bracket that determined the outcome of the previous 2022 presidential election, where the recently removed Yoon won with a 0.78% margin over Lee Jae-myung. Now, these shifts are quite significant because other age brackets have remained relatively stable in their support. The 40s and 50s still lean quite heavily towards a change from a conservative to progressive government, while the 60s and 70s favour continuity. So it seems that if those undecided voters favour Kim Moon-soo over Lee Jae-myung at the very last minute, then this presidential election, just like the last one, could come down to that 1 to 2% point margin. That's why we've seen the candidates targeting centrist voters over the past week, with the two right-leaning contenders, Kim Moon-soo and Ejun Suk, trying to solidify their conservative base as well.
So, Seong, are you saying the third-party candidate Ejun Suk is now perceived as a potential, factor in the conservative ticket?
Well, it's interesting because while he remains the least favourite candidate among the three main contenders, he has been seeing a slight but significant increase of support for, as he has been presenting himself as a youthful and forward-looking conservative candidate. However, his support base is still very much precarious, as half of those who back him say that they might vote for another candidate. And this potential shift actually gives him the power of alignment. If he merges with the leading conservative candidate, PPPs Kim, then they could together have roughly 40% support. Lee has so far loudly criticised the PPP's push to join forces, and it seems that half of his supporters don't necessarily want a merger.
A merger might happen under this scenario if Kim Moon-soo's approval rating rises significantly, and if Ejun Suk can add even a little bit to that, then there's a chance they can win. Because Ejun Suk is still young, if he doesn't agree to unify under those circumstances, he risks being blamed for the Conservatives losing, so he has to avoid that. But if support for Kim Moon-soo doesn't rise that much, while Ejun Suk's support actually surpasses 10%, a merger is unlikely.
Well, let's see how the first TV debate between the contenders this Sunday might sway the voters. Thank you for coming in today, Seong.
Thanks for having me, Tammy.
And Arirang TV will broadcast 3 live debates featuring the major candidates beginning this Sunday. Each debate will spotlight a different theme: economy on May 18th, social issues on May 23rd, and politics on May 27th. 4 candidates will take the stage: Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party, Kim Moon-soo of the People Power Party, Ejun Suk from the Reform Party, and Kwon Young-guk from the Democratic Labour Party. All 3 debates will begin at 8 p.m. Korea Standard Time. Down on South Korea's Jeju Island, trade talks between APEC member states are about to go into full swing. There, South Korea's Trade Minister An Dok-gun will also pick up on tariff negotiations with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. Our Painji reports.
Top trade officials from 21 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation member states, including the U.S. and China, have gathered on Jeju Island ahead of the APEC Leaders Summit later this year. Led by South Korea's Minister for Trade Chung In-gyu, this is the first time in 20 years that the country is hosting the APEC Trade Ministers meeting.
I hope today's MRT meeting will lay a solid foundation for dialogue and collaboration to overcome the political and economic challenges as well as uncertainties that we encounter.
On the sidelines of the event, Chung on Thursday held a bilateral meeting with China's top trade envoy Lee Jae-myung and also sat down for talks with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. Seoul's trade ministry said that Chung asked Greer about how tariff negotiations are going with other countries and discussed bilateral trade issues. It added that they also agreed to work together for South Korea to produce a meaningful outcome as this year's APEC host. Greer is also set to meet South Korea's Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy An Deok-gun on Friday. The two officials last met in Washington 3 weeks ago when South Korea requested exemptions from reciprocal tariffs while offering cooperation on shipbuilding and energy. Both sides are currently working to produce a package of deals to remove new U.S. tariffs before the July 8th deadline, when the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is lifted.
This year's event especially drew a lot of attention as major APEC member countries are seeking trade deals with the United States after President Trump announced a sweeping set of tariffs in April.
With trade officials from the U.S. and China both here on Jeju, a meeting between them on Thursday afternoon was also closely watched, as this could be seen as a potential move to make further progress to address trade friction. This comes after the world's two largest economies agreed last weekend in Geneva to temporarily lower most tariffs in a bid to defuse the trade war. 배은지, Arirang News, Jeju.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has slammed Russia for not taking peace talks seriously by sending a delegation that he said lacked decision makers. The peace talks, which were scheduled for Thursday but have reportedly been delayed until Friday without a face between Ukraine and Russia's leaders. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more.
All eyes were fixed on the first direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in more than 3 years, which were supposed to take place on Thursday but are now expected to happen on Friday in Istanbul. However, the negotiations failed to materialize amid criticism over the standard of the Russian delegation. Russian President Vladimir Putin was a noticeable absence on Moscow's list of attendees, despite proposing the talks and a challenge from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to meet face-to-face. While making his announcement regarding the team headed by his defense minister to Istanbul for the peace talks, Zelensky criticized Moscow for not taking the negotiations seriously.
After we understood the level of the Russian delegation, we see that, unfortunately, they are not taking the real negotiations very seriously. So far, we do not see among those present anyone who actually makes decisions.
The sides have also been separated with regard to the outcomes they each want from the direct talks. While Ukraine's top priority is a ceasefire, the Russian delegation, led by Vladimir Medinsky, said their goal was to eliminate the basic root causes of the conflict and to sooner or later establish long-term peace. He added that these negotiations are a continuation of the peace process that fell through in 2022 when Ukraine saw Russian demands as a threat to its sovereignty. Regarding the meeting, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Thursday expressed limited optimism, saying Washington frankly does not have high expectations of the negotiations. Speaking to reporters in the southern Turkish city of Antalya, he said only the direct engagement between the U.S. and Russia could result in a breakthrough.
And frankly, at this point, I think it's abundantly clear that the only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin.
Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Scores of people were killed in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza on Thursday, as U.S. President Donald Trump repeated his plan of turning the enclave into a freedom zone. Trump was speaking during his trip to the Middle East, which did not include a stopover in Israel. Isung has more.
With ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas stalled, the Israeli military conducted airstrikes on dozens of sites in Gaza from Wednesday night and into Thursday. The latest barrage of airstrikes killed at least 114 Gazans, with witnesses saying the Israeli military targeted medical facilities, including pediatric clinics. The airstrikes were also carried out as U.S. President Donald Trump was on his tour of the Middle East. Israel was excluded from his itinerary. However, Trump on Thursday doubled down on his proposal to displace Gazans, stressing again that the enclave should be made into a freedom zone. Speaking to reporters after a roundtable with business leaders in Qatar, Trump said that Gaza has been a territory of death and destruction for many years, adding that the U.S. should get involved and make it a freedom zone. All Arab states have rejected his plans, with Hamas calling it ethnic cleansing. Meanwhile, Israeli media reported that ceasefire talks mediated by the U.S. have not made any progress due to differences in opinion between Israel and Hamas. Lee Jae-myung, Arirang News.
And the White House announced on Thursday that the U.S. and the UAE have agreed on $200 billion U.S. dollars worth of deals during President Trump's Middle East trip, including cooperation in the AI sector. Washington says the two sides agreed on AI cooperation, including a promise to invest in data centers in the U.S. The U.S. and UAE will partner up on a massive AI campus, which is being touted as the largest such facility outside the U.S. And the Abu Dhabi data center will have a 5 gigawatts capacity and cover almost 26 square kilometers. Now, the AI cooperation deal will also allow the Middle Eastern nation to import up to 500,000 cutting-edge AI semiconductors annually from NVIDIA starting this year.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Starting in the U.S., the Supreme Court began hearing arguments concerning President Donald Trump's executive order aimed at ending birthright citizenship for children born in the United States to undocumented or temporary immigrant parents. On Thursday, the U.S. Supreme Court started a session on the executive order President Trump signed in January. Trump's order seeks to reinterpret the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause and would deny automatic citizenship to children born on U.S. soil unless at least one parent is a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. The directive faced legal challenges from 22 states and civil rights groups, with several federal judges issuing nationwide injunctions to stop its enforcement. The case taken by the Supreme Court centers on whether lower courts have the authority to issue such injunctions. During the session, justices' opinions were divided, with arguments saying that allowing the injunctions may overextend judicial authority, whereas limiting the injunctions could lead to an inconsistency of laws across states. Meanwhile, protests occurred outside the courthouse, where demonstrators voiced support for birthright citizenship. The Supreme Court's decision is expected by the end of June. In Europe, the United Kingdom and Germany have announced a collaborative effort to boost Europe's self-defense by developing a new long-range precision strike weapon. On Thursday local time, British Defense Secretary John Healey and his German counterpart Boris Pistorius met in Berlin to sign an agreement for the joint development of a deep precision strike missile system. The weapon is designed to have a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers. The plan comes under the Trinity House Agreement on bilateral defense cooperation signed in October 2024. It aims to reduce Europe's reliance on external defense support and address security situations such as the ongoing war in Ukraine. Joint procurement programs to counter undersea threats have also been agreed upon. Minister Healey stated that both nations are dedicated to making progress, not just making promises. In Brazil, a dye spill accident occurred on Tuesday in Sao Paulo's Jardim das Tulipas neighborhood, approximately 75 kilometers from the central city. According to authorities, some 5,000 liters of chemical dye spilled after a transport truck crashed, contaminating local streets and entering a nearby creek through a manhole. The blue dye changed the colors of the waters and ducks in the area, and some fish were found dead in a lake. Cleanup operations began immediately. However, investigations have begun to assess the environmental impact of the incident. The new pope is expected to move into the official papal residence, an apartment on the top floor of the Apostolic Palace, according to an Italian media report on Thursday. Pope Leo XIV, the first American-born pontiff, had reopened the traditional papal apartments on May 11th, which had been sealed following the late Pope Francis' death. Pope Leo's decision is a departure from his predecessor's choice to live in the Casa Santa Marta guest house and a return to long-standing papal customs. The Apostolic Palace apartments, unused since 2013, have nearly a dozen rooms, including a study, library, and private chapel.
It looks like a wet start to the day for many, and we can expect rain or passing showers across the country today. Heavy rain is forecasted for the south coast in Jeju, with thick rain clouds approaching this morning. And at times, we are looking at downpours of 20 to 30 millimeters per hour there. And mountainous regions on Jeju could receive up to 150 millimeters. The south coast could see up to 200 millimeters. So further south, we'll be dealing with heavier rainfall, possibly into early tomorrow. Meanwhile, central regions will see passing rain of 5 to 40 millimeters along with strong winds and thunderstorms. Afternoon temperatures will be similar to yesterday, topping out at 22 degrees in the capital, Daegu, Daejeon at 24 degrees. Now, Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do could see afternoon rain tomorrow. Then we should see clear skies returning nationwide on Sunday. But it looks to be an unsettled day for many today, so keep an umbrella handy and take care.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.